Hi, welcome to the 12th House, the podcast where we explore the intersection of well-being, intuition, spirituality, and intuitive business, and where we pull the curtain back on areas of these industries that are somewhat mysterious, opaque, and confusing, and hopefully do that with a sense of humor and irreverence and love at the end of the day. I'm Michelle Pelizon, the host and the head witch in charge at Holisticism. Holisticism is the parent company of the 12th House, the Cusp, and the North Node, and I'm delighted that you're here today. I know you could be listening to a lot of other things like, Olivia Rodrigo's album or The Daily or some true crime podcast, and I'm just delighted that you are taking the time with me and Wallace and our guest, Kalen Flynn, MD. It's going to be great. But before I introduce you to Kalen, I have a couple of light housekeeping things. First, I want to announce the winner of last month's raffle. Last month, we were giving away a one-on-one Akashic Records reading with me, yours truly. And our winner is Kathleen Teresa. Kathleen, I'm going to shoot you a DM. Congratulations. Can't wait to read for you. It's going to be so fun. And if you want to be entered to win June's raffle, all you have to do is subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating, and review it. Take a screenshot of your review, send it into the text line in the show notes, and you will be entered to win a Holisticism swag pack. It's so cute. You get a bunch of holographic stickers. You can put them on your computer, and you get a cute little keychain that says very witchy. It is very adorable. And may the luckiest person win. That's going to be so cute. We're going to be twins because I have the stickers all over my computer and I have the keychain on my keys. So there you go. Other things to update you on. We are launching a cute little product tomorrow that I think you're going to love. And it's called the 4-Day Intuitive Business Energetic Recalibration. And I created this because, we are in the 6th month of 2021, which means we're halfway through. And the summer solstice is coming up. Oh my God. We also have a summer solstice event coming up, which is going to be so fun. But this is a really good time to just look at what's happened in the last 6 months, to kind of take a look at what you wanted in January, what you said you were creating, and see if you're in the same place. Emotionally, energetically, from a visionary perspective, and just take inventory of where you're at, right? And decide, okay, now that I'm halfway through this year, what do I want to do? What's coming next for me? And I made this with intuitive entrepreneurs in mind. So if you're someone who has a business or is thinking about starting a business or creating something, when I think of an entrepreneur, I really mean creator, anyone who's birthing something into the world, or has birthed something into the world. And it's going to be just so delightful. It's so good. So every day, it's just 4 days long, so it's quick and dirty. Every day you'll get a series of exercises to focus on that should take you less than 10 minutes. And you'll also get a spiritual practice or ritual that goes along with each day. We're walking you through the 4 pillars of intuitive business: growth, revenue, retention, and impact. And at the end of this 4-day experience, you can do it on your own timing. You don't need to tune in with me every day. This is completely self-led. At the end of that 4-day experience, you should feel really good about what happened in the 6 months leading up to this. You should have really clear eyes on what happened and how you used your energy, and hopefully no judgment towards yourself one way or another. And you should also have a really clear directive of where you want to go next. So we'll talk about future visioning and quantum leaping in this 4-day energetic recalibration. And the point is to recalibrate, right? Is to notice where your energy is at, decide if you're using the right amount of energy and how you're investing that, and to what end. Why? What do you want? What do you really want, to quote the Spice Girls? And are you aligning yourself towards that vision? And if not, great, let's get you aligned. And if so, awesome. Let's double down and see how we can collapse that timeline in a way that's easeful and delightful. It is good. It's really good. And it's really affordable. Sliding scale, $9, $19, or $29. You decide how much you want to spend. Of course, it is self-selecting sliding scale, which means that we have suggested donations based on where you might fall on that sliding scale. And we believe in the honor code here at Holisticism, and we trust that you will be in integrity in everything that you do, and you will be impeccable with your word, because that is the type of person that you are. So you can find that tomorrow. It goes live on Wednesday. tomorrow at holisticism.com/recalibrate. I love it. It's so good. All right. And what else have we got? Oh gosh, we've got a lot more happening. We have a lot more happening. So the doors to the North Node open officially on June 20th, which is summer solstice. And if you don't know about the North Node, it's our private members community for intuitive entrepreneurs. It is, they are the best people. They're so cool. The North Node is something that I've been running for almost 2 years. And it's this giant library. Imagine that. Close your eyes. Not if you're driving, but if you're sitting, close your eyes. Imagine this library that has hours and hours of content and classes and reading materials and experiences and challenges where, depending on what you need for your business, you can sort of walk through these aisles in this library and find things like how to do candle magic to help your business move forward, and herbs to support your immune system and your nervous system as an entrepreneur who's sometimes stressed, and how to do past life regression to understand the patterns that you're in this life and the decisions that you're making in your business and in what you do. And you have this access to all these things. And you just get to like sort of play at this buffet of wisdom and knowledge and magic. It's so fun. We've got all these amazing master classes from incredible teachers. I have a lot of my own classes in there, and 99% of the content inside the North Node is content that you've never seen at Holisticism before. So you have never had access to it unless you are in the North Node. And if you're someone who, like me, really likes a plan, I learned that this is something that people with ADD and ADHD really need, is like clear directions, which is why I think this is why I created the North Node the way that I created it. When you join, you get this success plan, and we have created this archetype journey for intuitive entrepreneurs. And so depending on where you fall on that journey, whether you're maybe at the very beginning stages or somewhere in the middle, or maybe like you're pretty far along, there are a set of milestones that you can check off your list. So you know exactly what to hit and what you should be focusing on in any given moment when you're inside the North Node, if you want that kind of support. And if you're more of a free spirit, you don't really love a plan, that's awesome. You have this giant library to choose from where you can just like, wander through and delight and look at how to copyright and use spells as you're copywriting, how to be your own spiritual CFO, money is magic, all these just like juicy pieces of wisdom that you stumble along hopefully right when you need it. And it is my favorite place. Of course, the content is great, but the people are the best. And really that's what makes the North Node so special. And like, I know that I'm just waxing poetic about it, and it's not because I'm the mom, trust me. It's because I'm really just like blown away by the fact that these people exist who are inside the North Node, these other North Node members. I think one of the hardest things of having an intuitive business is that there's no rule book and there's no like playbook. At least I'll speak from the I. My experience has been, if I want to run a business that's different than the typical sort of patriarchal, capitalistic, extractionary businesses that like make me squirm and make me feel really dirty and bad. If I want to run a business that's not like them, I basically like have to write my own rules and like forge my own path. And that it can be really tiring and really hard. Because sometimes you just want someone to tell you what the right answer is. Like sometimes you just want your mom, right? And to do it alone is really challenging. But when you have a group of hundreds of people who get you, who are just as magical and witchy and delightful and active and, believing in social justice and equity, and who understand business but also understand energy, you have this powerful council of collaborators who can help you make better choices and who can make something. We can't just run business as usual anymore. This is not a time for business as usual. We live in extremely unusual times. We've proven that running business, quote unquote, as usual, the way that Google or Facebook or like BlackRock or whatever, like the way that these giant companies that are sort of like destroying the world have, is not the way, right? We can't follow in their footsteps. We have to choose new pathways. And as a solopreneur or a small business owner running business, saying that you're not going to keep business as usual, run business as usual, can be really hard because you realize, oh my God, there's a reason that people do it this way, right? Because it's easier. It's easier to have, I don't know, a company-wide policy that doesn't have empathy at the center of it, right? It's easier to say, well, new moms don't get maternity leave or new moms only get 6 weeks because like, I don't know, you don't have to take into consideration when something goes wrong or when a mom is going through postpartum depression or the fact that like, I don't know, we're not just here to be like productive little workers on the planet to perpetuate capitalism and make people money. We're actually here to have human experiences. And if we sort of pull at that string, then everything that's problematic about capitalism will start to crumble, and it's easier to pretend like it's working than it is to start to dismantle it. Because if you start to dismantle it, then you have to build a new structure. And how do we do that? And I don't say this to be like, don't do it. Just keep running business as usual. I don't think that's the answer. But I do think that I need to be honest with you, like it's not easy. And what makes it easier is having other people who you can bounce your ideas off of, having other people who are deciding not to run business as usual, who are making new choices, who are making different choices, who you can say, okay, how's that working for you? Wait, teach me how to do this. Wait, can you help me with this? And who are game to do it. And that's the coolest thing to me about the North Node. Yeah, like, again, the content is incredible, but the people are incredible. And this is the last time that we're going to open the doors to North Node in a big way, most likely, just because we are at capacity. We can take one more big class of people, and then we're going to basically shut the doors, and we'll only pull people up off the wait list when we have inevitably a member move forward because they've reached the end of their archetypal journey and they're ready to graduate. So there will be a very, very, very limited number of spots available, maybe like once a quarter. And yes, we're not doing this to like, I don't know, create a sense of scarcity or anything like that. It's just that here's some inside baseball. When you run a small business, you have to decide some things, right? You have to decide if you want, once you reach a certain point, how to become more scalable. So how do you do things at a bigger scale with more people? So if we have 20,000 members of the North Node, and to give them, every member, the level of care that we give our members now, I would need to hire hundreds of people. And while that might be really cool for another entrepreneur, that is not my path and that is not my journey right now at this point in my life. I love my team. I love having a small team. I love being able to be deeply connected to the people I work with. And I also really love offering them tons of freedom and being able to have business not as usual so that I can create a really safe, supportive space for the people that work with me. And I don't think that I have the skills to do that for hundreds of people right now. And so we can't just keep adding people to the North Node because then we'd have to hire more and more and more people. And I don't think that I have the energy to do all of that well. So maybe that is something that I just need to work on. But I think we also need to be realistic about what types of businesses we're trying to build and what our capacity is. And at this point in my life, it's more important for me to create this really sacred space than it is to like scale our numbers and make like, boatloads of money. It's more important to me to create community that feels safe than it does to scale. And so that's what we're choosing to do. And that might change in the future. Like who knows what will happen, but that is the future for right now, at least for the next year. So if you want to join the North Node, the doors open on June 20th. And if you have any questions about it, you can always ping me. And we have a ton of members right now. So like I said, and they're incredible. They're incredible people. So if you have questions, you can always ask them too. And if you want to go directly to them, you can just pop into the Holisticism Hub and you can search for anyone who has the North Node little tag on them, and you can just ask them about their experience. I'm sure they would love to help you, or you can post in the Holisticism Hub, ask a question, and a bunch of them will chime in. They're delightful and so warm and engaging and wonderful and special. So, okay, I'm going to stop talking about the North Node now because I want to talk about our episode. And oh my God, this intro's been so long. Please don't don't divorce me. Okay, so that's what I have to offer you. That's the housekeeping stuff. You know, we are a business. In order to make this free podcast, I do need to run the rest of the business. So thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks for listening. Let's talk about our guest. Today's guest is Kalen Flynn. Kalen is a psychiatrist. She's currently a resident at UCLA. And wow, what a gem of a human being. Kalen is one of our visionaries in residence at Holisticism. The VIR program, Visionary in Residence program, is a 12-month incubator / artist virtual residency that we created with the purpose of making wellness more accessible and inclusive, and by elevating people in the space who are doing just that. So we selected 7 different practitioners from all areas of wellness to participate, and Kalen was one of our visionaries in residence. Kalen is such a gem. She's actually a member of the North Node before she joined VIR, and Kalen is working on the intersection of psychedelics, plant medicine, and psychiatry. And you'll hear in this episode exactly how she got into psychiatry, but I'm blown away by her. I'll give you the short answer. She decided to go to med school and become a doctor because she believes in plant medicine so much and the power of psychedelics to help heal us. And the thing that I really love about Kalen is that she knows her place. Like, I'm going to just say it candidly. As a white lady, she knows her place when it comes to, at least from where I sit and from the way that she talks about plant medicine. She has studied with indigenous cultures who use plant medicine and who use psychedelics in ceremony, and she does not claim to be a practitioner of those things, which I really appreciate, because that is sometimes something you see is just random white people going and doing ayahuasca and then saying that they now know Mother Aya and they are facilitators of ayahuasca, which I would say, feels like maybe not. Feels kind of dangerous. But we talk about that in this episode. And I'm blown away that Kalen experienced psychedelics and plant medicine, that she honored the cultures and honors the cultures that have been stewarding these practices for centuries. And she appreciates them so much and recognized that modern psychiatry is separate and wasn't taking these practices seriously. She decided to bring it upon herself to try and help bridge that gap. And so she went to 6 years she went to med school. She's like training to be a psychiatrist. The dedication to me just to sort of be that bridge between psychiatry and plant medicine and psychedelics and hopefully integrate these two spaces is, like, I'm blown away. That is truly visionary to me, for her to have seen that 6 years ago and decided that. And I just love her perspective. And I also love hearing about mental health and spirituality from someone who studies psychiatry. I think you're going to love it too. She's not a regular doctor. She's a cool doctor. And Kalen is actually teaching a class for Holisticism on exploring the food and mood connection, nutrition for mental health on June 23rd at 1 p.m. You can join that class. It's at a sliding scale of either $9, $19, or $29. We'd love to have you. And Kalen is, like I said, as someone who is a psychiatrist or studying to be a psychiatrist, who's a resident, I really appreciate her perspective on nutrition and how making these simple changes in the way that we eat, like drinking water, and how we nourish ourselves really impacts our brain and the chemicals that our brains are bathing in and how we see the world. And I think that we often hear from nutritionists or dietitians who tell us, of course, that there's a connection between what we put into our bodies and our mental well-being. But to hear it from a psychiatrist hits a little different, doesn't hit better or worse, but it's just different. And I really appreciate that. I also appreciate that Kalen has a background in psychiatry, and so many people who teach about nutrition are not informed when it comes to disordered eating. And I think that Kalen's perspective, I really trust her as a practitioner. So if that's something that you want to explore and dive deeper on, I think you should totally join the class. I talk about in this episode actually how I changed up my nutrition earlier in the year because I was having some depression, and how much of a difference it made. And I'm just constantly reminded that, yes, of course, there are things like, microdosing and psychedelics and adaptogens and all the fancy things that we do and things that feel out of reach that we can do to help our mental well-being. But there's also so much that we have access to on the day-to-day that can change our mood instantly. And it doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be out of touch, and it doesn't have to feel out of reach. So I hope that you can join us for class, and you can find the link below in our show notes. And I think with that, I'm going to just now that I've given you a 20-minute intro, I'm going to let you run with it. And here's Kalen. Hi, Kalen.
Hey.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm so excited to welcome you and introduce you to the Holisticism in the 12th House community because you're one of our visionaries in residence this year.
I'm so happy to be here with you guys.
Well, tell us a little bit about, but tell our listeners your background and kind of what you're entering VIR with and working on over this next year.
Sure. So I am currently in psychiatry residency training, finishing up my third year and about to start a fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry, which I'm really excited about. And my huge interest and reason for going into psychiatry was to work with psychedelics. And so now just over the past several months, I feel like increasingly seeing news articles about psychedelic research all the time. So really excited that that's happening and we're getting really close to making these potentially prescription medications. But my angle in psychiatry has been sort of maybe a little bit wider than just the psychedelics. I've been really interested in holistic psychiatry, so taking a whole person approach to mental health care and looking at root causes for why we have mental illness in the first place. And have also spent a good amount of time looking at traditional medicine models for healing and specifically traditional use of psychedelics, which I think we can learn a ton from.
Just reading your application for VIR and what you like, when I was reading about your work, the way that you've described it, and also knowing you now and having worked with you for the last couple of months, hearing your reverence for so many of the indigenous cultures that you studied with and healers and practitioners that you study at the feet of, really, and how much you respect them and honor them and want to not appropriate their culture in any way, but learn from it and understand it for yourself, not to become a practitioner even, but just to deepen, is really impressive to me. And I feel like so often when someone steps into sort of allopathic medicine, because it is such an entrenched career and it's such a long process, that sort of like curiosity and reverence and maybe sort of like fringe perspective can sort of be like beaten out of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're really good at beating.
And I'm just so impressed that you've been able to hold on to that so with such conviction and clarity, and also hold the fact that like you're like in residency at UCLA, right?
I'm starting my fellowship there. Yeah.
Yeah, like that. And that's huge. You're like, you have your feet firmly planted in both worlds. And I think it's so impressive. And I can imagine it's also quite challenging to be in both and maybe feel like you don't fit in either.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Totally. I kind of see my role as being like a bridge builder or translator and really kind of connect the worlds of traditional medicine and allopathic medicine. I think I went through a process of like dismissing allopathic medicine entirely as I was in it and think there's nothing here. The only thing I care about is learning from people who are like working in a more, I think, coherent way where they actually have more of a philosophy of what is going on with healing. And I think I've come to a more balanced perspective of kind of not devaluing my whole training. So I think that there is definitely at least a lot of power in psychiatry and the power that it has over your life if you are involuntarily hospitalized and things like that. Mm-hmm. And there's a light side to that too. There are really good things about allopathic medicine, particularly for emergencies. But yeah, I've been so blessed to get to learn from people who have been working with psychedelics in a traditional medicine way, particularly the Shipibo people in the Peruvian Amazon, who I've studied with the most, and their openness to this kind of teaching.
I was just curious where exactly you studied with them and what that process was like and how I think at one point you told me when we were talking about a review for the Cusp that you managed to also get school credit for that time that you were down there, which is awesome.
I sure did. Yeah. Yeah. So that was cool. I got medical school credit for being in the Amazon. It was like probably the best part of my medical school training, spending 3 months during my 4th year there. But yeah, I've used ayahuasca in Peru with the Shipibo people. And the first time I went down there was to a center just for 2 weeks and really wanting to learn and also wanting to be a physician who could speak openly about the psychedelic experience in these visionary states. I knew that I wanted to have this experience in a country where it is legal and being able to sort of come out of the psychedelic closet and speak from personal experience, not just, talking about like the science and what hypothetically it could do, but from how it's touched my life and just wanting to experience it. So I just think that there's so much to be learned from people who have been practicing these ways of healing for centuries at least. And then the kind of practices that have come up from there. I think that to me, at least, that's much more interesting than doing like a weekend training course from other doctors who've been learning about this for the past like 5-10 years, even though, there's things to be learned there too, but I was thinking, okay, if I want to work with psychedelics, I want to learn from people who have been doing this. And one of my teachers, his father and his father's father have been practicing with ayahuasca medicine. And I just think there's a beauty in being able to learn from people who have that kind of experience with it.
I didn't know this, that you got into psychiatry because of psychedelics, not the other way around. Not that you're like studying the brain. You're like, you know what? I think that this could be really helpful. So that feels like the long way around to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me more about that. Like, why did you pick that? Because I'm so impressed with that. I have my mentor, Ivy Ross, is this incredible artist and designer witch. And she also is the director of design at Google. And she has gone through all the bureaucracy and the like shmeh that goes with being at a big company. And she's been able to create amazing changes. But I'm like, man, I so look up to you and I would not want to do that. Like, I just want to do it my own way. So I'm so curious, like tell me about that, how that felt like a good decision for you or the right decision.
Yeah. So I came initially from a humanities background. So I had studied philosophy and sort of the history of knowledge. So I was in this interdisciplinary program, history, literature, and philosophy, and looking at sort of how ideas emerge in socio-political, cultural contexts. So that was sort of my framework. And I was looking at the philosophy of history and seeing how certain ideas emerge, like just the way we think about ourselves or understand the past. And so I was actually living in Berlin on a research fellowship in philosophy and looking at like narratives about how we make sense of the past and think about historical truth. And I had also had a history of autoimmune disease growing up. So I had been a patient and really come up against the failings of our medical system. And I'm also a 3rd generation physician. So I definitely I have a lot of people in my family that are doctors and think in this way. So I had this valuation of medical science, but then really just saw with chronic illness, how it personally broke down for me. And I didn't find answers and I had side effects to things and just felt like it was broken. So when I was in Berlin, I had also, I'll just go on a little bit of a tangent, but I had, in college, we had a shooting on my college campus.
Whoa.
And this woman in my small major, that was like 20 of us, was murdered.
Wow.
And yeah.
Where was that?
Wesleyan.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So after that had happened, I remember just feeling this sort of it felt like my world kind of broke down, and we'd been on the campus was then on lockdown for a day, and there was this part where I was laying on the ground with a couple of my friends because we thought we heard gunshots and someone coming back, and we thought that there was a active shooter, but there wasn't, and he had left, but he hadn't turned himself in. So just having this kind of trauma that shook me up, and it was okay, and there was this one woman was killed very sadly, but everyone else was okay. And just sort of that shook me to my core.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so then from there, I started looking at my ways of making sense of the world stopped making sense. And so I started to learn, about like alternative healing and reading about psychedelics and breath work and meditation. And like once I started to go down that path and like witchy stuff, once I started to go down that trail, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. Like this is amazing. And so I was living in Berlin doing this research fellowship in philosophy, but really feeling like that was not the thing for me. And then just like pulling on this thread about psychedelic research. And this was like 10 years ago. But even then I could see, wow, this seems like the evidence is slowly building. This seems like it's going to be a paradigm shift. And then doing like this personal healing work and really seeing changes around that. And then it just sort of like when I was in Germany, it was like, I think I need to go back to school and take the classes for medical school and become a doctor so I can do this work, which was accessible to me because I'm from a family of physicians, and it's so hard for people that don't have like those resources to make that change. So I feel very blessed that I was able to like have this idea and go into medicine. It's a huge issue in medicine that like so many doctors are just children of physicians, and there's like
Really?
Yeah. They had
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's a really hard thing just financially to do.
Yeah.
So it kind of constricts the field. But I was able to do that. And so I made the switch and then ended up taking all the classes to go to medical school. And like always with the idea in my mind of like someday, and I remember reading about ayahuasca and just knowing someday I will go to Peru and do this. And I want to learn from these people. And it was just this like crystal clear calling, I guess.
Wow. You're such a witch. You just knew. And like you're truly a visionary to see that this is the direction that the world is moving into. And although, I mean, like 10 years ago, I feel like you're giving yourself a lot more credit than you might realize, or you're not giving yourself as much credit. Like this wasn't like what people were talking about as a way to talk about treating things like PTSD, and certainly not the way that we're talking about it now. I mean, weed wasn't even legal 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Wild to think about. So the fact that you had the foresight and truly like the vision to say, okay, I'm going to need to make these moves because medical school takes XYZ amount of years in order to like make an impact in this community and in this space. That's wild.
Thanks. Yeah. It felt like this like very wild leap of faith. And I was really meditation at that time and just like checking in, and was like, really, am I going to do this? Because my life was like lined up to maybe like do some graduate work in the humanities, but it's like, I'm going to do this for psychedelics. And a lot of people were like, what are you talking about? Not
well, when you talk about it, I feel like you have such a clear and, like you said, crystalline vision. Like there's just such clarity in your voice and the way that you express it. Did you find that you had to keep that clarity to yourself throughout this journey, or especially if you had parents that were more traditional in the medical fields? How did you navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, definitely it was, especially around, like once I started applying to medical school and taking the classes, I really quickly learned that I had to keep my mouth shut so that I would be able to kind of climb those ranks and like get into medical school, graduate from medical school, and not be called quote unquote crazy for having these ideas. But luckily my family was really supportive. And my dad, even though he's a surgeon, like raised me to let my freak flag fly. And that was like his mantra. And I think that, there was this internal conviction that I felt like our system is so broken, and mental health conditions are chronic conditions. And just we're so good at emergency care and allopathic, sort of like looking at the body as a machine and breaking it down into its parts and understanding cause effects. That works great if you have a broken arm or you need a transplant. But when you're looking at like autoimmune disease or mental health or anything that people live with over time, the system is failing. Yeah. So it became so apparent to me, especially studying sort of how ideas are politicized in history and how things are acceptable or not based on the context that this was happening in science and that there was so much sort of ideology in science about what was allowed to be real or not. And so I definitely had a lot of supportive friends or people who the medical system had failed for who were like, hell yeah, that makes a lot of sense to try to change it. But I definitely learned to keep my mouth shut and not question, or like question internally, but not anything.
You knew when to play your cards. To show them. Yeah.
Right.
I think that in and of itself is a skill, and to have longevity, that's a type of endurance, to be able to stick to your convictions and believe in yourself so fully and see that have that crystalline vision, while also kind of having to hide parts of yourself from the world in order to survive. Do you feel like, I don't know, not that there's trauma there, but are you a little afraid to show up now that it's kind of time to show yourself?
Yeah, totally. It's so interesting because I've been working on this in some of my personal work just very recently, just about, this fear of being seen and fear, like shame of visibility and like all the things that come up around that. And just recently I have been doing a lot of work on like breaking out of this idea, these like perfectionist ideals of like what I think I'm supposed to be for other people. I think in medical school, you become an expert at jumping through hoops. There's an infinite number of exact hoops you have to clear to make it through. So now that I'm nearing the end and just have like one more year I have to finish to be a psychiatrist officially. Yeah, it is such a process to like allow myself to be seen. And
you've survived by not being seen or by flying under the radar. So to have to flip that on its head and be like, JK, now you need to be totally present and like be available for people to look at you and show, and not just like the version that the veneer that is acceptable, but like the true you, which is the reason you've been flying under the radar, is so you could survive until this moment or, get to this moment. That's such a different it's a flip.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so uncomfortable to just like trying to all the emotions that are coming up and like, wow, this like does not feel safe, like, or, easy necessarily, but it does feel energizing to start. And VIR has been such a cool part of that already. So like, yeah.
Well, we see you.
Thank you. That means so much.
You said something about mental illness and what we call mental illness, the fact that we call it something that's, I don't know exactly what your terminology was that you used to describe it. It set off a little trigger in my head of, I'm just curious, is it possible that what we call mental illness now is just a way of being and we've pathologized it and made it wrong? And I'd just be really curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I think short answer, yes. And there's that quote, I forget who it's by, but it's something like it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a sick society.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, there's so much in your question, so I'll try to.
Sorry, I didn't give you an easy one.
There's some favorite things to talk about, but like just from a somewhat like concrete perspective, our diagnostic categories in psychiatry are extremely messed up currently. So have you guys heard of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is like our big book of psychiatric diagnoses? And I was just actually reading stuff about how the reliability of our diagnoses has gotten worse over time. So there was like some study on comparing editions of the DSM. And basically what has happened is psychiatry has favored like broad and inclusive diagnoses, which capture a lot of people rather than being concrete and specific about things. So this does a few things for our field, and it's like our professional guilds that are leading this, which makes psychiatrists indispensable. Because if you have like a psychiatric diagnosis, then you have to see, a doctor, an MD, to be able to treat it. And it enhances the sale of pharmaceuticals because then you can justify treating anyone. So the diagnostic for category for major depressive disorder, which is like what we call depression, you need 5 of 9 criteria. So someone can have 5 symptoms and someone else, they can just share 1 symptom. But that could, for instance, be appetite. Someone could have a higher appetite or a lower appetite, and then they could look entirely different. Mm-hmm. And so basically there's this idea that it's internally inconsistent. Like, we're not talking about stable disease states, and it's really kind of distorts what we're looking at. So people meet this criteria, but it doesn't really tell us anything. It doesn't tell us about a shared brain state. It doesn't tell us even how they're going to do over the course of time. Like, someone could have a major depressive episode and get better after that, never be sick again, or it could turn into a different, like, bipolar disorder, or it could be, any number of issues. So I've been reading a bunch of stuff just about how the DSM is not, like, really a helpful way of helping people understand their illness and get better.
Yeah, it sounds like a linear way, and we're not linear. Like, just like grief isn't linear, depression definitely isn't linear, anxiety is not linear, PTSD we know that's not, the healing of that isn't linear.
Right.
And we're trying to, like, fit it into these boxes of, like, okay, now you're better. Or exactly. Like, you're healed, right?
Yeah. And so you bring up PTSD. And so in the DSM, in the new edition that came out a few years ago, somewhat recently, DSM-5. So PTSD is relegated to 1 chapter. And so what that is, like, trauma and related disorder, something like that. So what that does is kind of make it seem like everything else is not trauma related. But as we learn more about adverse childhood experiences or early trauma, it really seems, to me at least, looking at the research, that trauma is implicated in a lot of mental health conditions. So the idea is it sort of implies that these diagnoses are unrelated to trauma and that these symptoms are just emerging rather than considering, like, the social, psychological, the adversities of a particular person's life that have led to this disease state. There's still sort of what they would call a disease state, but, like, there's this idea that these states are, like, a biochemical imbalance rather than related to the particular person's life experience.
Yeah.
And then once you start to see it as an outgrowth of the trauma and adversity and, like, other things in the person's life that they've experienced, then it makes us as clinicians need to both be accountable to that whole person, and then also, I think, gives us a responsibility to start doing things to prevent that kind of stuff that we know leads to mental illness. Right.
Which, I mean, it sounds like that folds right into looking at things like systemic oppression.
Yeah.
If that's really, like, we're trying to hold ourselves responsible for people's care and well-being. And we know that systemic like, what happens in systems that marginalize people leaves them traumatized. Yeah, exactly. Then it's our responsibility to make it better, or try to.
Exactly. And it just in psychiatry. So what I did a lot of the time in residency was work in the psychiatric emergency room. So see people coming in psychiatric crises. And so often it felt like just seeing the end result of this awful system. So seeing people who, like, for instance, lose their job and then lose their health insurance and then can't be on their medication anymore. So then decompensate and then show up, not because, the doctor didn't know what to do or the patient didn't know what to do, but because they could no longer access it. Or I'm thinking
heartbreaking.
Yeah. And just constantly, like, homelessness. Like, I've had a couple of therapy patients who have been pushed into homelessness this past year, 2 people I've been working really close with, and just seeing, like, how limited the work, like, even medications and therapy are if these people don't have a roof over their heads or access to food. It just doesn't make any sense. And then yet we're hospitalizing people in the psychiatric hospital who come in for some of these issues for maybe a week max, which is a huge, huge waste of resources that you could use to be giving people housing or access to resources, or just people who are living under, like, a state of chronic stress because they're nervous that their kids are going to be shot in the street, or, like, have lost jobs because they tested positive for cannabis that they were trying to use to medicate for, like, a headache because they didn't have reliable access to healthcare. So there's just, like, this, like, constant level of, just, like, societal problems that show up as psychiatric problems. And then we take them into the hospital and we maybe put them on some pretty intense medications, but then we discharge them like to a shelter, quote unquote, and maybe they'll go stay in a shelter for like a night or two and then become homeless again. And it just seems like this vicious cycle where like something is broken and we're just like dealing with the people falling off the cliff rather than like looking why do people keep falling off the cliff?
Yeah. So how does psychedelics fit into all of that for you?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. So I was just talking with somebody who does plant medicine work, who works in healthcare, and was saying like, oh, I wish all of our patients could have access to ayahuasca, she was saying. And I was thinking like, that's not the first thought I have with my patients. Like I wish all could be housed. And then,
right. Yeah. You're like, I feel like there's some other stuff. That would be good.
Right.
That's cool. Jumping 10 steps ahead.
Right. Yeah. And have access to different psychedelics. That would be a great combination probably. So, I mean, that's a really big question. So I think there's massive potential for psychedelics in healing trauma. So the first psychedelic, I'll try to weave this back to your answer or your question, Michelle. The first psychedelic that will probably be approved, and it's not a traditional psychedelic, but MDMA, which is sort of like a...
Love MDMA.
Uh-huh.
Approve it, please.
We approve. We approve.
It looks like it's going to be on track to be approved by 2023, which is really soon.
Wow. That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
And wow.
But cool. I mean, like,
yeah.
Ethan and I do MDMA like twice a year, and we see a couples therapist who we love, and we told him, he's like, that's amazing. It was developed for couples therapy. Like, that's great. And we were like, wait, what? I thought you were going to yell at us, but okay.
Right. That's awesome that your therapist is supportive.
Yeah, he's cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. And yeah, the history is sort of interesting in that it was used for couples therapy before it was scheduled and made illegal. And actually a bunch of therapists came together and tried to write a letter to counter the scheduling. When something is Schedule 1, it says it has no potential for medical benefit. All these therapists came together and were like, no.
Do you know why it got shifted to Schedule 1? Like what was the...
Yeah, I'm not sure about MDMA in particular, but I know, I mean, the legacy of our drug war is a lot to do with criminalizing Black people and criminalizing people that were anti-war. But I'm not sure specifically why that was done for MDMA. I knew at some point. But yeah, it's an interesting question. But sort of part of this push, I mean, yeah, I can speculate, but I'm not sure.
I wonder if just criminalizing hallucinogenics in general is like, it's an umbrella and it's like a binary, right? Like these are fine. Anything like this is not fine, because then we can just sort of flatten the nuance and we don't have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There definitely are like forces that don't want us to be experimenting with consciousness, I think. Mm-hmm. But yeah. So the MDMA is going to be approved for PTSD, or not approved for PTSD. It's in phase 3 trials to be approved for PTSD that seem to be going well based on preliminary data. And right now there's also this compassionate use exemption, which means that basically trials that are far along in phase 3, people that aren't in the study but that have treatment resistant PTSD can apply to get an exception and use that when there's no other.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's super cool. And
sorry, you can just tell how much I like drugs. I'm like, that's so beautiful. And just thinking about it.
But it does raise interesting questions to bring it back to like kind of your question, which I can't remember exactly what you asked, Michelle, but it was thought provoking, or just like how does all that we were talking about before relate to psychedelics? So that like, I mean, there are some issues. So for instance, with MDMA, some of the research they're doing is on combat veterans, which is, I mean, I don't think that those people need to live with trauma by no means. Like nobody should have to live with trauma, but is that like greasing the wheels of our war machine to like,
oh my gosh. Yeah. Like
I think that always like there needs to be a question of like, why is this trauma happening? And is there things that we can do to reduce like the systemic burden of trauma and like prevent it, and then also deal with the downstream effects. So it's kind of a balance. Not that that should stop MDMA therapy. And they were really smart in the way that they designed the trials, because that's something that is hard to like politicize as something that hippies are doing if it's combat veterans that are benefiting or people that are survivors of sexual assaults.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. There's so much politicking that goes into all of this. I mean, I think that you're so smart and also like how strategic that I think of how strategic you have been in your study and how you're sort of entering this space, and you even pointing this out, like how intelligent they had to be to study it in this way to make it hard to say no to. Mm-hmm. It's wild just how many hoops we have to jump through.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, learning about all this stuff really shed light on for me how, like, I think I naively thought, okay, science is this operation where we look at everything and then we just decide what works from just like, inquiry, and then we figure it out. But like that's not what is happening. And so the psychedelic research has actually been quite slow, because in the beginning, it was all sort of crowdsourced, the money for this. So it's happening very, very, very slowly since the 90s, just kind of like crawling, even though they were finding good results. It wasn't like, okay, that seems promising, let's fund it. And now we see the entry of corporate interests into psychedelic medicine, and now this huge explosion in research.
And we were talking about corporate interests in psychedelics and mushrooms and psilocybin for one of our papers in the cast recently. Mm-hmm. And how we were talking, I think, Kalen, it was you and I who were talking on one of our meetings about how they're going to legalize it, but you can only use psilocybin according to like Western medicine doctors, and how like Western doctors approve of how you should be able to use psilocybin, and how even that, like how problematic that is to ignore thousands of years of like culture and experience with this medicine.
Yeah. I mean, all love to my medical brothers and sisters, but I don't think we're like the most equipped to be like doling that out necessarily, especially as you mentioned that there's a history of traditional use. It's not like this was just invented a moment ago. This is like the Mazatec people have been using mushrooms traditionally for a long time. And so, there's a really weird power dynamic that's happening. And there's like these corporate interests, the companies that there's one company in particular that kind of will likely be the first to have prescription psilocybin, which will probably come a little bit after the MDMA. So maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, maybe we'll see what happens, but they're in phase 2 trials right now for that.
Is it a big pharma company? Like, do we know who they are?
Yeah. So it's a company called Compass that kind of befriended. So basically there's a nonprofit entity called Usona that is trying to make this an accessible treatment, and is like giving it away for free for other researchers to do research on. And they're an advocate of open science. So basically there was this paper, or I guess like statement that came out maybe 3 or so years ago when we started to have this entry of corporate interest into psychedelics that said like, let's as a field commit to having open science, transparency, sharing our research, because we're really drawing on traditional use. It's not like Western medicine.
Invented this.
Stop it there and then like seal up the discoveries and then profit off of that. That's kind of messed up.
Which is how big pharma works, right? Is you develop a drug, you get a patent on that drug and how to use it, and then you make millions and billions of dollars off of it.
Right. Mm-hmm. There were these scientists calling for open science, and a bunch of people signed on. So there's one developer of psilocybin as a treatment for major depression. It's what they're studying right now. In the past, there's been research for existential anxiety in the context of life-threatening illness. So there's that. But in addiction, there's some good research actually on alcohol and smoking. So you have this nonprofit entity that's trying to develop it and not limit access. And then you have this company called Compass that has these bad business practices and has befriended a bunch of psychedelic researchers and then kind of broke those ties and then changed actually from a nonprofit to a for-profit after they had like gotten a bunch of the insider intel. So really, really shady stuff. And then tried to, I put this in the Cusp article, but recently they tried to patent hand holding. So they applied for patents, even like use of muted colors in a therapeutic environment, the like holding of hands during the psychedelic experience. So really patenting for a number of applications. And
that's evil.
Yeah.
It's like straight up evil. You can't there's no way for me to possibly justify that in my mind. Like that is straight up evil.
Yeah. It's not good. And then, so a lot of the research through them has not been like normal IP. It's like they own all the IP rather than the universities that are going. It's kind of unusual. Definitely like a money grab. And it looks like they could potentially be the first to develop. And they're even doing things. I was reading something recently about like the organ decriminalization efforts of starting to meddle in that and starting to like kind of exert pressure that it not be decriminalized because it's better for them if no one grows their own mushrooms, if no one goes to a treatment center and gets mushrooms. I think that's how it'll be in Oregon.
More evil.
Yeah, but it's not good for their bottom line if people have access to or like are able to grow their own mushrooms without the risk of being put in jail.
Man, that makes me so angry.
I know, my blood pressure definitely just went up.
like we have to stop them. Everyone needs drugs. No, but really, like, that's just like capitalism to its core. Like, how can we commoditize healing and again make it about class and oppression and like not really about healing? Make it about like making money. And no wonder people don't trust medicine, and no wonder people don't trust like pharmaceuticals, and no wonder now, like, thank God we're all vaccinated, but like no wonder people are questioning these companies because like, well, a lot of the time it seems like they do have malintent. It's really hard to make a decision about what's right.
Exactly. Yeah. It's messed up, and I think we'll see. So I think the decriminalization movement that's happening kind of all over the country, and a lot of places are having success pretty rapidly. I think it's really interesting because that's both moving it out of the big pharma, but also out of like the doctor-patient relationship. Not that there's not potentially some benefit. Like I think particularly when people have serious mental illness and you're assessing like suicidality and risk, I think it does make sense potentially to go to a psychiatrist because that's what we like learn about and can really, especially if people are on psych meds, which is a whole other issue of like if you're on an SSRI, it might you need to like taper that before doing ayahuasca, for instance, or there's like potential for interaction. So I think there's a role of doing this in a medical context and letting step out of that entirely. But it opens up this whole question of, do people need to be sick to benefit from these things? Or is this something that people like for the betterment of well people is kind of how it's sometimes talked about? And also I can go on and on about this, but it's just interesting because it's this idea that like communities don't know how to heal themselves. And I think that often it is in like a community that already has some cohesion that these things could be really interesting.
And it removes the use of these, let's just say plants at the very basis from the entire community aspect and makes it so transactional.
Right.
And the transaction is just what we're used to, like you were saying earlier, with treating the emergency once we get to the end result. And how much of that is just totally lost in the way that it's being used right now and commodified. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, do you think, Kalen, that they're, like you said, right now it's treating people who have been called mentally ill or who are dealing with some sort of diagnosis, but do you think that in the future psychedelics are going to be something that is actually like the upkeep of our well-being, like exercising every day or meditating? It's stuff that you do to maintain, or even like, I don't know, I think that we all have maybe things that we're struggling with mental health wise. I know as someone who's had depression for a really long time, pretty much everything I do like hedges around managing depression, like how I treat myself and my care. So is it possible that that's what psychedelics will be for us in the future? Is that your vision?
Yeah. So I think that there is a role for these medicines or plants outside of just the the medical context. So I think your question has multiple parts, and one piece is like, could this be preventative? And I think, the research on microdosing is in its infancy, and so we really don't know. I'm really curious to see what the findings on that are, because I do think that it's not. And also, just to like zoom out a little bit more, it just doesn't make any sense to let things get so bad and then you don't intervene until then.
Right.
Yeah. And so much of that has to do with our like for-profit health insurance system, where we're treating diagnoses and not people. And often people won't be reimbursed if you don't meet full criteria for something, then insurance won't cover it. And it just, that's a whole other thing that I'm happy to talk about too.
I wish we had 7 hours to talk on this podcast about this, because we could definitely go down that route.
That's a whole other but there's another way called single affair. But yeah, so I think that there, as a maintenance treatment, like certainly I think that's possible. And then, but I also think your question might be getting at like, is this something that people who maybe don't even have a diagnosis of depression might do just to kind of feel better?
Yeah, or just like, I think all day long, we're just trying to cope with being in the world and being human, honestly, right? And like, it's really hard because like, I don't know, there are things happening constantly that I don't know, if you really sat with them, you'd be like, how the fuck are we letting this happen? Like what's happening in India right now? India doesn't have vaccines because they sold all their vaccines to other people, because like the United States, and we're hoarding vaccines and people are dying. Like, how can we even how can we go on? We have to like shut off an aspect of ourselves, of our humanity, in order to exist in the world and continue. And I think that so often we go to wellness and well-being to unlock those parts of us that we've locked up in order to cope and move forward. And I just wonder if that's something that psychedelics potentially will be just another tool in our toolkit, just like meditation, or just like, making an herbal tonic.
Right. Yeah. I think in an ideal world, they certainly would be. And I can just speak to ayahuasca, for instance, where like, I think that we're limiting ourselves so much, as like I was just presenting this week on ayahuasca for addiction and sort of some of the research in my addiction clinic. And like, while that's really cool to think of it as like, oh, this sort of sacred plant medicine has been used traditionally for a number of purposes, like for community cohesion, or for talking with supernatural forces, or for diagnosing, like the medical is just one aspect of the potential of it, to just say, oh, this is a potential addiction treatment, rather than this is something that can help people, get a little like better or grow in a different way. I think that when you try to fit these really interesting plants into these boxes and act like they're just like a way to treat something, or to kind of quiet your symptoms, or to make it so that you can go back to work, I think that we're shortchanging it, and that there's a huge potential. And I think like, again, a lot to say about this, but like, I think one of the most profound things is they can help us heal our disconnection from the natural world, from each other, from like our environment.
Like from the society that's so individualistic.
Yes, exactly. That, yeah. And I think that, to use them to kind of break that down. Cause I kind of feel like we're over individualized, and we have all this like autonomy, quote unquote, and choice, and like, rather than like thinking of ourselves as part of a social fabric and part of like the planet and an ecosystem.
Yeah. Like interdependent.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something that we just talked about in the cusp about, stay with me on this, on acne neutral skincare, and how like if we start embracing, and beauty brands have recently started embracing skincare, and like skin that isn't perfect, quote unquote, perfect by Eurocentric beauty standards. And they've even like removed the term problem or normal skin from like, I don't know, your lotion packaging, because they're like, all skin is normal. And like, when we start talking, if we keep pulling at that thread in the beauty industry, then anti-aging is going to go away. Then like getting rid of pimples is going to go away. And guess what? The beauty industry won't exist, because the beauty industry is built around sort of weaponizing our imperfections and telling us we need to make ourselves better. So we need to buy this cream and that potion and that mascara in order to be worthy. And I wonder I feel like this is the same. It's like if we pull at that thread of individualism and being disconnected and not treating the whole, will like medicine, the way that we practice now, just like kind of cease to exist. I mean, in some way, I don't know if that's catastrophic, but like I could see it happening.
Yeah. And I think it would be, not catastrophic in a lot of ways. I think it might be good to use that and have that crumble a little bit, or like transform into something different for sure. Yeah. I had another thought about this, but I don't know that it will strike me.
Well, I'm also just like, I know we're almost at the very end of our time, but this is something maybe we can have you come back and talk on a little bit more at another point. But I'm really curious about like the witchy and magical and the strange, and how often, and sort of like these things that we talk about, like intuition or talking to plants or hearing or seeing. I'm curious about the intersection of mental illness, or what's called mental illness, and the things that we often experience as spiritual. And I think that can be a really scary thing for people that are discovering spirituality in themselves or tapping into their intuition, because they wonder like, well, am I quote unquote crazy? And like, how will I know if I've gone too far, if I've gone off the deep end, if I'm just making this up? Do you have any like perspective on that yourself, as someone who works with people who are mentally ill, but also you're obviously so spiritual?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big question and I love it.
I know. Sorry, I gave it to you in the last 5 minutes of our call.
Great. And this is going to be like not exactly scientific, but I think, I mean, even in literature and art, there's a lot of like kind of reflection on the genius and madness line. And I feel like it's something that's so easy to cross into. And I mean, it happens to people who don't have psychotic illness on psychedelics. You can kind of dip into that and have that experience of not full on what it feels like to have those more non-ordinary experiences of reality that just happen day to day. But I kind of think of it as, yes, people can certainly like kind of break through too much, like either by taking psychedelics in an unsupportive environment or like when they're not in a good mental place. And then, but I do, and this is like just really, like, I guess my personal experience, this is not like a research thing, but I know that some of my patients that are in that state who are in like a psychosis or mania, like some of my patients have talked about seeing energy or like, for instance, and even in my body, like I remember talking to this one patient who was like, oh, you're having a lot of pain in your left shoulder. Okay. Like I wasn't like grabbing it. Maybe I was standing a little tense. And I'm not saying like psychotic people are psychic and we should just like, well, like that or anything like that. But I also have had that experience and have had several people really close to me end up in mental hospitals and like sort of seen this vision that they have and the things that they can see like in our world and articulate that I think is also a strength. And I think we pathologize that a lot. And these people who might have been elevated to some extent to like a seer role and venerated, we've made that as, an undesirable state. And then also just another thing on that note is just, I think in psychiatry and depending on if you talk to people who are more analytically inclined, their answer might be different. But by and large, we think that the content of a psychotic experience is meaningless. But there are some interesting people who are working with hearing voices and what that means for people. And even a group called Hearing Voices Network, which is kind of like a patient-led group that helps people, like, people who think that these experiences might not be something to be pathologized, but it might be something that empowers them or helps them. And all sorts of, I've heard a lot of different narratives from people who live with voices and do find it to be not something that they just want to get rid of.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that. It feels like really hard conversation to have, like just in general, because we don't really know. And we want to give people treatment and care when they need it. And also like, we don't necessarily want to pathologize something that doesn't need to be pathologized. But I've walked in downtown LA, which has a really large homeless population with a lot of people who might be described as mentally ill. Some of the things that they say, I'm like, that guy's seeing shit that I just don't see. Like, he's seeing something for sure that's real, and I don't have the ability to access that. And that's so interesting.
100%. Yeah. I have a bit of a superstition with people who I encounter on the street who are potentially mentally ill or homeless. I always listen to what they say as like a message from the universe that I need to hear. I'm always like, okay. And then I think about it later. Because I just feel like they're clearly accessing a plane. For me, it feels like that we're just not on. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm just not on that plane that they're on. So what information can I take from it? That's just my weird relationship to it.
Yeah. I love that perspective, Wallace. Yeah. And there's an interesting like anti-psychiatry, critical psychiatry movement that kind of, I mean, they say all sorts of things, not just this. Some people believe these kinds of things, though, that like, why are we pathologizing what could be like a quote unquote, maybe not normal, but a part of the human experience. Listen to people in that choir.
Interesting. I don't know if I would call myself anti-psychiatry.
Right. Yeah. I don't.
Yeah.
Either. But
I feel like I wouldn't do that, but yeah, it is interesting to like, you said someone who might be called the sage or, traditionally be a medicine person or healer or a seer, like in the past, and hold that archetype in the community. And I think again, like if you don't have community to hold you, then like that role, you can't really play that role anymore. And that's when it becomes problematic potentially. Right.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is just that there's really interesting research working on early intervention in psychosis with community. So seeing that potentially there's some in Finland, actually, they're doing some treatment that involves like super early intervention and working through relationships, and they can actually stop like psychotic illness from progressing when they start to work in that way. And there's some of that like theory starting to come to the States and be implemented. But I think that there's exactly what you're saying, Michelle, like if you have a community to hold that, it might be something that needs to be pathologized.
Yeah.
When you were in Berlin, did you find you were absorbing any other kind of perspectives on mental health that are just not as common in the West?
That's a really interesting question. I think not so much just because I wasn't encountering the mental health system so much there. Yeah, I was more in the like philosophy communities.
Right.
Like see any psychology.
Drinking coffee, wearing berets.
Yeah.
I love that you've had such a breadth of experiences, and like you've gotten to sort of hold life up and look and examine it from all these different lenses. I think that's what makes you so good at what you do. And I'm excited for you to be a leader in psychiatry and psychedelics.
Thank you so much.
Well, any last words? Anything else we should double click on before we let you go and get on with the rest of your day?
I mean, I could talk at length about things I don't know that I
know.
We're going to have to have you come back on the podcast, but you are teaching a class in the next couple of weeks on nutrition.
I am. Yeah. I'm super.
Which we didn't even get to tease. Can you tease a little bit of it now?
Yeah, tease it for us.
Yeah, so even over the past, like almost since I graduated from medical school, basically, which was just a few years ago, there's been really interesting research on nutrition and mental health. And there's so many directions for this, like looking at the gut-brain connection or the microbiome. But really the research that's been happening, we've known for a long time that certain diets or nutritional deficiencies were correlated with mental health symptoms. But then more recently, there's been research that has shown that even a brief dietary intervention, so in young adults, which was like 17 to 35, I think, doing a 3-week intervention of just changing the diet, not in like any sort of crazy way, not focused towards weight loss, but just focusing on more nutritional foods, you could see improvements in both depression and anxiety. So doing like a study where they're actually doing the intervention and starting to show that intervention works rather than it's just a correlation. So I think that's amazing. And there's just so much cool research on the microbiome. And so one of the ways that we can influence that is by what we eat. And so that's super cool. So just, there's so much that, and also, so when your neurotransmitter pathways run, so like to make serotonin, you need the building blocks in your brain, but also to make those pathways run, you need vitamins like vitamin C or zinc and just a bunch of nutritional stuff. And I think that that's so undervalued, but there's even some new research that shows that when you change what you're eating, like even if you're on an antidepressant, that might work a little better. And you need, or if you're, feeling a bit anxious and you're just trying to figure out what can I do before calling a psychiatrist? Like I'm not quite at that point. There's so much that we can do with food. So
what can I do if I'm having an anxious day? Like, Kalen, I'm going to ask you on the pod for all of us having an anxious day. What can we do?
Sure. So to be clear, this is not medical advice. Wallace, I'm not.
Right.
Yes, it's okay.
But I'm wondering, so the first things I would consider are you drinking caffeine?
Not today.
Okay. It's amazing to me how many people come in with anxiety but are like, oh yeah, I just had a nice coffee.
They're like, I'm literally on a stimulant. Like I'm basically on meth right now. So maybe that's why I have anxiety.
Right. And I do that to myself all the time. I'm like, I'm tired of drinking my caffeine, but then I feel anxious. And, it's hard to break that cycle.
It's a cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I might, see if, are you eating regularly? Could you be having blood sugar crashes that are making you feel anxious? So blood sugar can kind of crash that. And then emphasizing, like what they did in these research studies were they called it a Modi Med diet, which is like modified Mediterranean, but just eating like fruits and vegetables. Yeah, pizza.
All the
Exactly. More pizza. But some people are really sensitive to gluten or casein, so like cheese or bread, depending. So potentially just noticing if that might be the case. So I'm right now, and I'm going to run this again. I'm doing a 21-day sort of clean up your diet challenge of like finding ways to just temporarily change our eating patterns and then see how you feel and what works. But I think eating whole foods and then eating high quality protein sources, fats. Like, do you eat fish?
I do. Yeah.
So like omega-3s, there's a lot of evidence for mental health benefits. So
I'm so excited for your class. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No.
I was just like,
I love the questions. Yeah, because there's so much.
Yeah.
It's such a building block that if we want to, like if we're going to go to the psychiatrist and like start a medication, we also want to make sure that, or like at least for my patients, I want to make sure that they're also doing like the basics, like nurturing their mental health so that they can have the neurotransmitters. And then there's like a huge connection between the gut and microbiome is just mind blowing. Like doing fecal transplants, like transplanting.
Oh yeah.
Hot.
Like people with autism. I was just at a child psychiatry conference in the fall and they were presenting new research where kids with autism were having a transplant of a kid not with autism of their like gut microbiota and seeing really, really good results. So just wondering like even in things like that, could the microbiome and the bacteria that live inside of us be implicated? And so diet is like the best way a huge way to change that, barring a fecal transplant. But
that's so cool. And I'm so glad you're teaching this class because it's really like, I don't know if I want to use the word fraught, but it can be really challenging given how many people have disordered eating or a history of eating disorders, and just like the internet research or like internet experts that are talking about nutrition or talking about dietetics. And I love that you are like so capable of holding that space and that being able to have that conversation, because it's something that makes me really like, as someone who had disordered eating in the past, it makes me very like, I don't want to perpetuate diet culture, but I know.
I totally, exactly. Like, and I know that like I started to undo some of my autoimmune stuff by diet changes, but then in that process, like went down the path of orthorexia myself and became.
Same. When I was diagnosed with epilepsy, the ketogenic diet was developed for people, for children with epilepsy in the 1920s. So that was something that I ended up going back to nutrition school to like study that, because no doctor ever told me by the way, you could probably stop having seizures if you stopped eating carbs. They just were like, you're on medication for the rest of your life. Oh, you have brain damage and you can't remember like where you live. Sorry, you're just going to have to deal with that.
Right.
And yeah, it took me down this other sort of like obsession path of like being afraid. And now I think I'm a little bit better, but I was going through like a bluesy state a few months ago. And I did a nutrition moment. Mm-hmm. And for 21 days, dude, I felt amazing. I felt like all my anxiety, all my depression stuff, like it was gone and it was so simple. It was almost annoying. It's like, all I have to do is like not eat sugar. This is so annoying. I wish this didn't work, but it does.
Yeah. Exactly. And I've been loving hearing little bits and pieces about your coffee journey, Michelle, because I'm on a very myself, but it's real.
I know. It's so annoying. I feel like
so hard.
I feel like such an LA person. Like, I'm too sensitive for coffee, but it really does make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. My partner this week was like, Kalen, like, you are a different person. You're so much more anxious when you're drinking coffee. Like, no more coffee.
Now I think I'm even too sensitive for matcha, which is supposed to be like not, but I think the caffeine, like it's still got high amounts of caffeine.
Yeah, exactly. I'm right there with you. I had my matcha this morning. I was like having conversations.
Like, but I love it. I love the ride.
I love the drama.
So part of it is that, and so Michelle, and I'm in such a learning process, so I'm sure I'll like mess up and learn more about this and like how do you do it in a way that is not like an eating disorder or orthorexia kind of thinking. And it's so I'm trying to like do my work from just a place of loving food, because I also love to eat. We love to cook here, and trying to emphasize those parts while also giving people tools to make their own decisions. So it's not like about a single right diet. And like the thing that I always come back to is that like even a glass of wine, especially if it's like a beautiful natural wine, can be the most therapeutic thing in the world, even if it does cause anxiety later, but with like the right friends or in the right moment, or like even French fries or something can if it's like, it doesn't have to be this only like looking at it from the biochemical way, like food serves a social function.
Yes, that's exactly it. It's not just biochemical. I actually had my first glass of wine in a year. Well, not in a year, since 2021 with the team this week. I had a little glass of sexy red wine, and I was like, I love wine. I feel amazing. This is so fun. Yeah. And it was great. And I didn't feel bad the next day. I was like, cool. Okay, great. I don't know the next time I'm going to drink, but that was delightful.
Right. Exactly. So moving out of the like binary, there is this like right, healthy way to eat, and I'm going to be like, I'm bad and I feel shame if I don't adhere to it 100%. It's like about how you feel in the moment and like what you ask and what feels good. So
like the cascade of chemicals that I feel like come with shaming yourself and the negative talk. I'm curious about that, because you can feel it course through your body when you're in like a spiral of binary thinking about food. Yeah. And shame is so powerful. It can have this hold over us. So I think kind of just trying to, how to break out of shame is like a big question for to do it in my own life.
Yeah.
But
I mean, shame feels like a tool of patriarchy, because I just think about how distracted I was my whole life by shame, by being ashamed of myself or my body or my choices, and how that kept me from being, and like making living and doing and like actually questioning, like, why do I feel fucking ashamed about this thing? Like, and that kept me small. And so, and distracted.
Exactly. Ooh, I like that. I think that picks it up for sure. I feel that.
Oh, Kalen, it was so good to have you on the podcast. We're going to have you back, and you're a VIR for all of 2021, and your Holisticism team for life now. We've accepted you. You're one of us. So.
100%.
It's so fun to talk with you both today. This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks for making the time for us. We know you're so busy, but how can people find you and support your work and connect with you other than our workshop?
Okay. Your newsletter is so good.
Oh, yeah.
I just had to plug that.
Thanks, Wallace. So I've been writing a newsletter just for like a couple of months that you can sign up for on my website, which is visionarymedicine.co. And you can also follow me on Instagram, which I'm starting to post a little more, planning to post a little more, at Kalen Flynn, MD, or at Visionary Medicine. Those are baby accounts, but hoping to grow.
They are.
I'll start somewhere.
It's true.
Exactly.
It's true. Oh, Kalen, we're so lucky to have you. You truly are a visionary, and I just love your wealth of knowledge and your heart. And I'm just so happy that there's someone like you doing the work that you're doing. And I'm really grateful that you keep on keeping on. So thank you. And thanks for tuning in with us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I could say the same things right back at you. Thanks, guys.